Steven Seagal shoved the kid backward with one hand, palm flat against the teenager's chest, and the kid's shoulder blades hit the lobby wall so hard the framed movie poster behind him cracked down the middle. The boy wasn't even 17 yet, still had acne on his jaw, but he stood right back up and stepped forward again, fists balled, chin raised, like he'd been hit plenty of times before and stopped caring about it a long time ago. What happened in the next 48 hours would become the most talked about story in a small Montana town's history. A legend whispered about for decades. A moment when the biggest action star in the world found out that real toughness doesn't come from a movie set. Now let me set this up for you, because you need to understand exactly where we are and exactly who's involved. The year is 1991. Steven Seagal is at the absolute top. Under Siege hasn't come out yet, but he's already done Above the Law, Hard to Kill, Out for Justice. He's everywhere. Magazine covers, talk shows, action figures. The man walks into a room and people move out of his way. Not because they know him from movies, because he's 6'4", 240 pounds, and he moves with this heavy, deliberate swagger that tells you he believes, truly believes, he could put any human being on the planet on the floor. And here's the thing nobody tells you. Back then, a lot of people believed it too. Seagal's in Montana for a location scout. His production team is looking at some mountain property outside a town called Ridgewater. Population about 4,000. One main street, 2 bars, 1 diner, a feed store, and a single-screen movie theater called the Starlight Cinema. The Starlight's been there since 1954. Same family's owned it the whole time. Red brick front, marquee with missing letters, the smell of burnt popcorn baked into the walls permanently. Seagal's staying at the only decent lodge in town, and on his second night, he decides to go see a movie at the Starlight. He brings 2 guys with him. One's his personal assistant, a guy named Danny who carries a clipboard everywhere. The other is a bodyguard, big Hawaiian dude named Chemo, arms crossed, jaw set, professional wall of meat. They walk up to the Starlight around 7:30 in the evening. The marquee says they're showing Backdraft. Seagal walks up to the ticket window, and behind the glass is a woman named Eileen Cooperton. Eileen's 52 years old, been running the Starlight for almost 20 years since her father-in-law handed it over. She's got reading glasses on a chain around her neck, gray hair pinned back tight, and she doesn't care about celebrities. Not even a little. Seagal leans down to the window and says, 3 tickets. Eileen looks past him at Chemo and says, he can't come in. Now, believe me, you have to understand what just happened. Nobody tells Steven Seagal no. Not in 1991. Not his agents, not his directors, not the stunt guys he's been roughing up on set for 3 movies straight. The man once told a reporter he'd been a CIA operative in Asia, and the reporter just printed it. That's the level of unchallenged authority we're dealing with. Seagal blinks. Excuse me? Eileen taps a small laminated sign taped inside the window. It reads, Management reserves the right to refuse entry. That gentleman, Eileen says, pointing at Chemo, was in here 6 months ago. Got into an altercation with another patron, broke a seat, he's banned. Seagal turns around and looks at Chemo. Chemo shifts his weight, looks at the ground. He gives a tiny nod. It happened. Some local guy had mouthed off, Chemo had grabbed him, things went sideways, a theater seat got ripped clean off its bolts. Eileen had kicked him out and told him never to come back. Seagal turns back to the window. He puts both hands on the counter and leans forward so his face is close to the glass. Do you know who I am? Eileen pushes her glasses up her nose. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Seagal. I've seen your movies. My rule still applies. Get this. The biggest action star in America just got checked by a 5'2" grandmother in reading glasses, and there isn't a single thing he can do about it. This is her building, her business, her rules. But Seagal doesn't accept that framing. He straightens up. He turns to Danny and says, Get the manager. She is the manager, Danny whispers. She owns the place. Seagal's jaw tightens. He steps back from the window, looks up at the marquee, looks back at Eileen and says, Chemo stays outside. I want 2 tickets. Eileen tears off 2 tickets and slides them under the glass. Enjoy the show. Now right here you might think this is the story. Famous guy gets humbled by a small-town lady. Goes and watches his movie, end of tale. But that's not even close to what this is about. Because what Seagal doesn't know, what nobody's told him yet, is who Eileen's other banned patron is. the one she kicked out just 2 weeks before Seagal arrived. And that's the person this whole story actually belongs to. His name was Jack Cooperton, and I swear this happened the way I'm about to tell you. Jack Cooperton was Eileen's nephew by marriage, 23 years old, 6'1", lean, close-cropped hair, quiet in a way that made noise. He'd been a United States Marine, enlisted at 18, deployed at 19, served 2 tours in the Persian Gulf during Desert Storm, and in February 1991, just 5 months before Seagal rolled into Ridgewater, Jack Cooperton did something that made him a genuine, decorated, verified war hero. His convoy got hit outside Kuwait City. IED took out the lead vehicle. Small arms fire from 2 directions. Jack's sergeant took a round through the thigh and went down in the road. Jack sprinted 40 yards across open ground, no cover, bullets snapping past him, grabbed the sergeant by his vest straps, and dragged the man 110 yards back to a drainage ditch while returning fire with his sidearm. He took a fragment in his left arm doing it. Didn't stop, got his sergeant behind cover, applied a tourniquet, called in air support on the radio with blood running down his wrist. They gave him the Bronze Star with Valor. His picture was in the Ridgewater Gazette. The whole town threw him a welcome home barbecue at the VFW hall. Jack Cooperton was the most respected young man in a 50-mile radius. But here's what nobody tells you about war heroes. They come home, and the war follows them like a shadow stitched to their boots. Jack couldn't sleep. Loud noises made his hands shake. He started drinking. Not beer, not wine, whiskey. Straight, fast, purposeful. He was putting away a bottle a day by July. 2 weeks before Seagal showed up, Jack had walked into the Starlight Cinema on a Thursday evening, drunk and getting drunker from a flask in his jacket. Halfway through the movie, something on screen, an explosion, a gunshot, something set him off. He stood up, knocked his popcorn across 3 seats and started shouting. Not words exactly, just sound, raw, broken, terrified sound. When another patron, a man named Gil Harkins, stood up and told him to quiet down, Jack grabbed Gil by the collar and shoved him into the row behind them. Nobody got hurt. But Eileen came up the aisle with a flashlight, looked Jack in the eye and said, "Jackie, you gotta go, and you can't come back until you get some help." She said it with tears on her face, but she said it, and she meant it. Jack left. He'd been staying at a motel on Route 12 since then, barely talking to anyone. The town knew, everyone knew. They talked about it in low voices at the diner. Jack's having a hard time. Give him space. He'll come around. But nobody was actually doing anything. Now, the night after Seagal gets his tickets and watches Backdraft, he's at the town's one good bar, a place called the Railhead. He's got a bourbon in his hand. Danny's next to him. Chemo's by the door. Seagal's telling stories, loud ones, about training in Japan, about the dojo he ran, about how Aikido is the supreme martial art and everything else is just flailing. He's got 5 or 6 locals half listening, half starstruck, and Jack Cooperton walks in. Now Jack doesn't know who Seagal is. Doesn't care. He walks to the far end of the bar, sits on the last stool, and orders a whiskey. He's wearing a faded olive-drab jacket with a Marine Corps patch on the shoulder. His left arm has a scar that runs from his elbow to his wrist, still pink, still healing. He doesn't look at anybody. But Seagal notices him. Of course he does. Seagal collects military credibility the way some guys collect watches. He's always talking about his government connections, his supposed intelligence work, his combat training. Seeing a real Marine in a bar is an opportunity. So Seagal picks up his drink, walks over, and sits down 1 stool away from Jack. "Marine?" Seagal asks, nodding at the jacket. Jack glances at him. "Yeah, I respect that. I did some work overseas myself. Different capacity, classified stuff." Jack takes a sip of his whiskey and says nothing. And this is important. Watch what happens next. Because this is where Seagal makes his first mistake. He keeps talking. He starts telling Jack about his martial arts background, his time in Japan, the dojos, the philosophy. And then he says, a trained martial artist, someone with real discipline, doesn't need weapons. The body is the weapon. Jack sets his glass down. His hand is steady for the first time in weeks. He looks at Seagal and says, "You ever been shot at? Trust me on this." The entire bar heard it, and the entire bar went quiet. Seagal leans back. "I've been in situations most people can't imagine. That's not what I asked. Seagal's bodyguard Chemo takes a step closer. Jack doesn't even register him. His eyes are on Seagal, not angry, not aggressive, just clear, focused. The way they were when he was dragging his sergeant across that road. Seagal changes the subject. He waves the bartender over, orders another round, tries to pivot to movies. But something's shifted. The locals at the bar are watching now, and they're not looking at Seagal with awe anymore. They're looking at Jack, because they know what Jack's done. They know what it cost him. And they know that the guy in the fancy leather jacket telling classified war stories has never bled for anything except a box office opening. Seagal senses it. He's a predator in his own way, and predators can feel the room turning. So he does something unexpected, something that will set the rest of this story on fire. He asks about the Starlight Cinema. Heard the lady who runs it banned some people, Seagal says. Banned my guy too. He jerks his thumb toward Chemo. What's her deal? A local named Pete Anderson, sitting 3 stools down, speaks up. Eileen runs a tight ship, always has. She banned a war hero too, another guy mutters. Her own nephew. Seagal's eyebrows go up. He looks at Jack. Wait, you're the one she banned? Jack's fingers tighten around his glass. He doesn't answer. Seagal laughs, not a mean laugh, more like a disbelief laugh. But it lands wrong. It lands very wrong. Because everybody in that bar knows why Jack got banned, and none of them think it's funny. She banned you from a movie theater, Seagal says. A Bronze Star recipient? That's insane. She had her reasons, Jack says quietly. What reasons? You break a seat, say something loud? I've been thrown out of better places than that for less. Seagal grins. He thinks he's bonding. He thinks this is camaraderie. It isn't. Here's the thing about Seagal. He sees everything through the lens of dominance and submission. Someone banned you? That's disrespect. Fight it, push back, impose your will. That's his entire worldview, on screen and off. But Jack Cooperton doesn't operate that way. Jack knows what real consequences feel like. He's carried them across open ground. Seagal finishes his drink and stands up. You know what? I'm going to talk to her, tomorrow. Nobody should ban a decorated veteran from a movie theater. That's un-American. Jack looks up at him. Don't. One word. That's all he says. Don't. But the way he says it, it's not a request. It's a warning, not a threat of violence. A warning that Seagal is walking into something he doesn't understand. Seagal waves it off. He drops a $100 bill on the bar, tells the bartender to cover Jack's tab, and walks out with Chemo and Danny flanking him. The door swings shut. Pete Anderson looks at Jack. He's really gonna do it, isn't he? Jack drains his whiskey. Probably. Listen to me now. The next morning, 11:15 a.m., Steven Seagal walks into the Starlight Cinema like he owns the place. The lobby is small. Tile floor, old glass concession counter, a cardboard standee for some movie nobody remembers. Eileen is behind the counter, restocking napkins. Seagal walks right up. No greeting. He says, I want to talk to you about your nephew. Eileen stops restocking. She sets the napkin stack down carefully. What about him? He's a war hero. He served this country, and you banned him from your theater, your own family. Eileen takes off her glasses. She folds them and sets them on the counter. And then she says something that stops Seagal cold. Mr. Seagal, I love that boy more than you will ever understand. And loving someone means telling them the truth, even when the truth hurts them, even when it hurts you. Seagal opens his mouth to respond. But Eileen isn't done. Jack came into my theater drunk and put his hands on another man, a man with a wife and 2 children who were sitting right there watching. Jack scared those children. He scared half the theater, and he scared himself. I could see it in his eyes. Seagal shifts his weight. He puts his hands on his hips, that signature stance wide and deliberate. The man has PTSD. He needs support, not punishment. And this is where Eileen Cooperton shows you what real strength looks like. She steps around the counter, all 5'2" of her, and stands directly in front of Steven Seagal. She has to look almost straight up to meet his eyes. What I did was not punishment, she says. What I did was the first time anyone in this town said no to Jack since he came home. Everyone else just looked the other way because they felt sorry for him. They let him drink. They let him disappear. They let him rot in that motel room. I told him he couldn't come back until he got help. That's not banning him, Mr. Seagal. That's the only door I could close that might make him open a different one. Now mark my words. Seagal has faced down bad guys in 6 movies. He's flipped stuntmen over tables, snapped prop arms, delivered justice through a squint and a wrist lock. But standing in front of this woman, in this tiny lobby that smells like decades of popcorn butter, he's got nothing. He's got absolutely nothing, because Eileen is right, and somewhere in his gut, even Seagal knows it. But here's his problem. He's Steven Seagal. He cannot be the guy who walked in to fix something and got corrected by a grandmother. That's not in his programming. So instead of saying, "You know what, ma'am, I hear you," he doubles down. "I'm going to bring Jack here myself," Seagal says, "and we're going to walk through that door together, and you're going to let him in." Eileen picks her glasses back up, puts them on, looks at Seagal over the rims. "No, I'm not." Seagal turns and walks out. The door bangs behind him. Through the lobby window, Eileen watches him cross the street toward his rented SUV. She takes a slow breath. Then she goes back to restocking napkins. Here's what Seagal does next. And I'm telling you this because it tells you everything about who this man is and what he values. He drives to the Route 12 motel. He finds Jack's room. He knocks. Jack opens the door. He's wearing a white t-shirt and jeans. His room is sparse. A bed, a chair, a television with the sound off. There are 2 empty whiskey bottles on the nightstand and a half-full one on the floor. Seagal looks at the bottles, then at Jack. "Get dressed. We're going to the Starlight." "I told you not to do this. And I'm telling you, brother, nobody has the right to ban a man who bled for this country. You earned respect. You earned the right to walk into any building in this town." Jack leans against the doorframe. His scarred arm hangs at his side. He looks at Seagal for a long time, and then he says something that nobody expected. "She's the only person who told me the truth." Seagal frowns. "What truth?" "That I need help." You could have heard a moth hit the window. Seagal standing in a motel doorway, all that size, all that confidence, all that Hollywood certainty, and a 23-year-old Marine with shaking hands just dismantled his entire argument with 8 words. But Seagal doesn't hear it. He can't hear it. Because hearing it would mean admitting that Eileen was right, that the ban was an act of love, and that his whole intervention was ego dressed up as heroism. So he reaches forward and grabs Jack by the shoulder. "Come on, let's go." And that's when things go very, very wrong. Jack reacts on instinct, pure muscle memory. The hand on his shoulder triggers something deep, something wired into his nervous system by combat. He grabs Seagal's wrist, pivots, and throws him into the motel wall, hard. Seagal's back hits the plaster and a chunk crumbles behind him. For 1 second, Steven Seagal, the Aikido master, the self-proclaimed deadliest man in Hollywood, is pressed against a motel wall by a 23-year-old with a bronze star and a drinking problem. Jack lets go immediately. He steps back. His hands are trembling. His eyes are wide. He looks at his own hands with horror. Seagal pushes off the wall. His face is red. Kimo, who was standing by the SUV, starts moving toward them, but Seagal holds up a hand. "Stop!" And this is the moment. Right here. This is the decisive turn. Because Seagal has a choice. He can swing. He can engage. He can prove that his Aikido works, that his training is real, that he's everything his movies say he is. Jack is drunk, undersized, and traumatized. Seagal could probably take him. Probably. But he doesn't swing. And here's the truth about why. It's not compassion. It's not wisdom. It's because in that 1 second against the wall, Seagal felt something he doesn't feel on movie sets. He felt what it's like when someone isn't acting, when the violence is real, when there's no choreography, no stunt coordinator calling cut. Jack's grip on his wrist was iron. Jack's eyes were somewhere else entirely, some road in Kuwait, some firefight that never ended. Seagal straightens his jacket. He looks at Jack. Jack is backed against the opposite wall of the motel hallway, breathing hard, looking at the floor. "I'm sorry," Jack says. "I didn't mean to. You grabbed me and I—" And then Jack Cooperton, Bronze Star recipient, the toughest young man in Ridgewater, Montana, slides down the wall and sits on the ground and puts his face in his hands. This is what war does. Take that in. This is what it actually does. Not the movie version. Not the action figure version. This. Seagal stands there. For maybe 10 seconds, he just stands there. Danny's behind him with the clipboard, frozen. Chemo's halfway across the parking lot, stopped mid-step, and Seagal, for the first and maybe only time in this entire story, does something decent. He sits down. He sits down on the ground across from Jack, in a motel hallway that smells like mildew and cigarettes, and he doesn't say a word. He just sits there. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't a redemption arc. This isn't where Seagal becomes a good guy. What he does later proves that. But in this moment, for about 2 minutes, he's just a man sitting with another man who's in pain. And that matters. After a while, Jack lifts his head. His eyes are red. He says, "I need to talk to Eileen." Seagal nods. "Not to get unbanned. I need to tell her I'm gonna get help. The VA has a program. I called them last week. I just haven't gone." Seagal stands up. He extends a hand. Jack looks at it, then takes it, and Seagal pulls him to his feet. And here's where Seagal makes his last mistake. Because instead of letting this be Jack's moment, he decides to make it his. He drives Jack to the Starlight Cinema. He parks out front. He walks Jack through the door. And when Eileen looks up from behind the counter and sees her nephew standing in the lobby, Seagal steps forward and says, "Eileen, Jack has something to say, and I brought him here to say it." He's producing the scene. He's directing it. He's making himself the catalyst, the hero, the reason this reconciliation happens, and Eileen sees right through it. She ignores Seagal completely. She comes around the counter, walks past him without a glance, and stands in front of Jack. She's so much shorter than him that he has to look down to meet her eyes. "Jackie? Aunt Eileen, I'm gonna call the VA, the program in Billings. I'm gonna go." Eileen's chin quivers, just for a second. Then she steadies. "When?" "Tomorrow. I'll drive up tomorrow." She reaches up and puts her hand on his cheek. "You come back and see me when you're ready. The seat'll be here." Jack nods. He can't talk. He turns and walks out of the theater, past Seagal, past Chemo, into the daylight. Eileen watches him go. Then she turns and looks at Seagal, who's standing in the middle of her lobby with his hands in his jacket pockets, clearly waiting for gratitude, clearly waiting for his moment, the thank you, the recognition. Eileen says, "Jack was coming to see me today regardless. He called me this morning, before you showed up at his motel. Cross my heart." That's what she said. Seagal's face goes through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, irritation, the faintest hint of embarrassment. Then his default, stone. "Well," he says, "glad it worked out." "It worked out because Jack decided it would," Eileen says. "Not because a movie star drove him 3 blocks. Seagal turns and walks out. He doesn't say goodbye. The lobby door swings shut behind him. Through the window, Eileen watches his SUV pull away. That evening, Seagal is back at the railhead. He's telling the story, of course, but in his version, he's the one who got through to Jack. He's the one who sat with him. He's the one who convinced him to go to the VA. He's the intervention. He's the turning point. The locals listen. Some of them nod. Most of them just drink their beers because they know the truth, and they know it doesn't matter what Steven Seagal tells himself. But here's the part of this story that makes it legendary. And I need you to hear this. The next morning, Jack Cooperton gets in his truck and drives 4 hours to Billings. He checks into the VA program. It's a 6-week residential treatment for combat-related PTSD. Group therapy, individual counseling. No alcohol, no escape. He stays the full 6 weeks, every single day. When he comes back to Ridgewater, he's not fixed. That's not how it works, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But he's better. He's sleeping. His hands are steady. He's talking to people again. He gets a job at the feed store. He starts going to meetings at the church on Wednesday nights, and on his first Friday back, he walks into the Starlight Cinema. He buys 1 ticket. Eileen tears it off and slides it under the glass, and their fingers touch for just a second, and she gives him the smallest nod. He walks into the theater, he sits down, the movie starts, and Jack Cooperton watches the whole thing. Start to finish, no flask, no incident, no noise except the movie and the sound of a man breathing normally for the first time in months. You want to know what Seagal was doing that same Friday? I'll tell you. He was in Los Angeles, in a production meeting for Under Siege, telling the director that his character should have more hand-to-hand combat scenes because audiences need to see what a real martial artist can do. He never went back to Ridgewater. He never called Jack. He never mentioned the incident in a single interview. In Seagal's world, it didn't happen. Or if it did, it happened the way he rewrote it. He helped a broken veteran, and then he moved on because that's what heroes do. But in Ridgewater, they remember it differently. They remember Eileen Cooperton, 5'2", reading glasses, popcorn butter under her fingernails, who loved her nephew enough to lock the door, who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is refuse to pretend everything's okay. And they remember Jack, who got back up, not because a movie star told him to, not because someone dragged him to a reconciliation, because he picked up the phone himself, because he drove himself to Billings, because every day for 6 weeks he sat in a room with other broken men and did the hardest thing any of them had ever done, harder than combat, harder than dragging a sergeant across open ground. He asked for help. That's the story. That's what happened. And it tells you everything you need to know about the difference between pretending to be tough and actually being strong. Jack Cooperton ran the feed store in Ridgewater for 11 years. He married a woman named Sarah in 1994. They had 2 kids. He still went to Wednesday meetings. He still had bad nights, but he handled them. He built a life out of the wreckage, one ordinary day at a time. Eileen kept running the Starlight until 2003, when she sold it to a family from Billings. On her last night, she showed The Wizard of Oz, same movie her father-in-law had shown on opening night in 1954. Jack was in the 3rd row. He brought his daughter. Seagal went on to make more movies, each one a little worse, each one a little further from reality. He kept telling stories about his classified past, his combat experience, his undefeatable martial arts, and the world slowly figured out that most of it was smoke. But in a small town in Montana, they figured it out first. Now, if this story hit you somewhere real, if it reminded you that strength isn't volume and power isn't performance, hit that subscribe button right now. We tell stories here that nobody else will touch, and the next one's already coming. Let me leave you with this. There's a plaque on the wall of the Ridgewater VFW Hall. It went up in 1997, the year Jack became post commander. It doesn't mention the Bronze Star. It doesn't mention Kuwait or the convoy or the 40-yard sprint through gunfire. It says one line, just one. The bravest thing I ever did was ask for help. Jack wrote it himself. And that's the real story of what happened when Steven Seagal learned a war hero was banned from a cinema. The shock wasn't the ban. The shock was finding out that the strongest person in the room wasn't the one with the black belt. It wasn't the bodyguard. It wasn't the action star. It was a grandmother with a flashlight and the courage to say no. And it was a 23-year-old kid who finally said yes. That's the legend. And Ridgewater still tells it.